We are celebrating a very special person and a very special tradition of oral history. And Arthur Hansen has had a long and important relationship with the museum. As many of you know, between 2001 and 2005, he was the senior historian here at JANM, but his expertise has been so crucial to our work far beyond that as well. In recent years, he's returned for programming around many of his books, including last year's celebration of Beyond the Betrayal, which was Yosh Kurnia's memoir edited by Art. And throughout my time at JANM over the last few years, Art has always been referred to as just a trusted source and a friend of so many here at JANM and so many who work here now and have worked here before. And I know there's some of you who worked with Art while he was here at JANM in the audience, so thank you for being here today. His impact on oral history will be explored today, but I know it's had such an enduring impact on the way that we tell stories and highlight the first-person narrative and the histories that we tell here at JANM. So I'm really honored that his family and friends decided that today's event could happen here at the museum and that we could all gather here. Speaking of, how many of you here have heard Art speak at JANM before? That's a lot of hands. So we're really excited to have you back here today. And to start the program and guide us through the event today, I'm going to welcome Bruce Embrey, the co-chair of the Manzanar Committee, to the stage.
Thank you, Joy. I'm honored to be here as one of your MCs, and as Joy mentioned, we're going to explore and discuss Art's tremendous impact on oral history, but on our community in particular. And we're going to hear from a number of accomplished individuals, just a few of many of his admirers and friends and colleagues who've worked with him over the years. And we're going to discuss Art's considerable contributions to our community, look at his keen analytical abilities throughout the 50 years of solidarity with us and many others. I'd like to take a minute to reflect on Art's long and impactful collaboration with my mother, Sue Kunatomi Embrey, and the Manzanar Committee. Many of you know my mother was the first interviewee of Art's back in, I believe, 1973. But that was only the beginning. Art engaged with my mother and the Manzanar Committee for decades. And Art was an active participant in the early days of the Manzanar pilgrimage. I have photographic proof. I have photos from 1973. I'm hoping he can identify some of the colleagues that went there with him. I have some photos. And he wasn't just an active participant in the pilgrimage. He consulted with my mother on euphemistic language in the early 70s. And in 1975, Art actually organized a forum at Cal State Fullerton, where my mother delivered a talk entitled Concentration Camps, Not Relocation Centers, which we still use to this day. I believe that was 1975. And furthermore, Art, his keen insights about the Manzanar Revolt or the Manzanar Uprising helped challenge the silence and the misinformation about one of the most important acts of resistance from behind barbed wire. His distinguished work with my mother, Betty Mitson, with Harry Ueno, and the publication of Manzanar Martyr, again, was another breakthrough accomplishment. Art's engagement and support was invaluable to the development of the Manzanar Committee. But this was just one example of his unwavering support for those willing to set the record straight during a time when it wasn't the easiest thing and certainly not the most popular thing to do. So recognizing Art as an important ally, someone willing to work with other trailblazers struggling against a decades-old dominant view of the forced removal is long overdue. Art Hansen was and remains one of our community's staunchest and most effective friends and allies. So some of the few admirers of Art will speak today, and the first one that I'd like to invite up to the mic is Brian Nia. Brian's the content director for Densho, a former curator at JANM, and perhaps best known for his work as the editor of the Encyclopedia of Japanese American History. Brian?
Thank you, Bruce, and yeah, thanks for inviting me today. You know, for over 50 years, Art Hansen has been one of the leading scholars of Japanese American history in general and of the World War II incarceration and exclusion in particular. When he came along in the early 70s, he was part of a new generation of scholars that came out of the movement for ethnic studies at that time and who challenged the then dominant narrative of Japanese American history, that of the so-called quiet Americans who went compliantly to the so-called relocation centers. Art is among a group of scholars that really has turned that narrative on its head, so that today we as a community recognize that there were many responses by Japanese Americans to the roundup and incarceration, including significant resistance. Chronicling the story of that resistance has made up a large part of art scholarship, whether rethinking the December 1942 uprising in Manzanar, examining the unrest at Gila River, studying draft resistance, or many other topics. And in so doing, he has worked closely with the Japanese American community, whether organizations like the Manzanar Committee, here at JANM, with Densho, or with individual families. His close connection to two such families and his editorial guidance has resulted in the recent publication of two memoirs by key Nikkei dissidents James Omura and Yoshi Kuromiya. A branch of his research has also looked at the administration of the incarceration, a topic that has drawn increasing interest from scholars in recent years. And he has also consistently played a key role in promoting the work of others, myself included, I think many people in this room, for which we greatly appreciate. And he's also published much in public-facing publications, such as the Nichide Weekly, for which he has been reviewing books for years. He's a beloved colleague and mentor to many, as I'm sure many of you in attendance today can attest to. He's also, of course, left a huge legacy in oral history, which is which many others will speak of. So I will only say that he and his colleagues over the past 50 years leave behind an amazing archive that will be a source for scholars and students for years to come. I just want to end by saying, being the first of many people, I think, today to thank Art for all that he has done, both in terms of his scholarship and his oral history work, to express my appreciation, to assure him that he is appreciated and loved by the community, and that his work will live on for generations to come.
Thank you, Brian. Our next speaker is Valerie Matsumoto, and Valerie is a distinguished professor in the Department of History and Department of Asian American Studies at UCLA. She is the author of City Girls, the Nisei Social World in Los Angeles, 1920 and 1950, as well as Farming the Home Place, a Japanese American community in California, 1919 through 1982. In 2017, she was appointed to the George and Sake Aratani Chair on the Japanese American Incarceration, Redress, and Community, which I'd like to note is a big supporter of the Manzanar Committee's Katari program. Thank you. Valerie?
It's wonderful to be here as part of Art Fest today. I wish first to share the thoughts of David Yu, who is away at a conference. He wrote, "I wish that I could be there in person to celebrate and honor Professor Hansen. During my time as a faculty member at the Claremont Colleges, I regularly taught an Asian American history course. As part of that class, I often included an oral history component. Over the years, I sent students to the collection that Professor Hansen directed at Cal State Fullerton. Students conveyed to me that not only his staff, but also Professor Hansen took time to help them and to encourage them on their papers. Later, when I moved to UCLA, I had the privilege of organizing events through the Suyama Project on Japanese American resistance during World War II with my colleague, Professor Lane Hirabayashi. In Denver, we were able to bring Professor Hansen as our featured speaker in partnership with community-based organizations. It was evident then, but long before, that Professor Hansen has been a scholar and teacher with deep community roots. Many thanks, Professor Hansen, for your generosity and commitment to social justice over many decades. End quote. So following Lane Hirabayashi, our friend and colleague, Tricia Toyota and I became the co-editors of the Nikkei in the Americas series published by the University Press of Colorado. Tricia and I are immensely proud that the very first book to appear since we took on this role is Art's Manzanar Mosaic. In my brief time, I want to say a few words about Art's interview in Manzanar Mosaic with Sue Kunitomi Embrey, two of my heroes in one interview. This interview was conducted in the mid-1970s when Japanese Americans were beginning to open up about their wartime experiences, and the grassroots redress movement was gathering momentum. Sue was then in her early 50s, I think, when she recalled her experiences as a young Nisei in Manzanar. Sue revealed the cultural divisions and diversity among the camp inmates. The government may have lumped all Japanese Americans together, but there were significant differences, as she noted. Quote, "You don't put groups of people together because they're one race, because each group, depending on where they come from, has a very different lifestyle. I think that in Manzanar, the biggest difference was between Bainbridge Island and San Pedro, and even San Pedro from the rest of Los Angeles. My mother said, well, even in Japan, fishermen are considered an entirely different group. They're rough. They have to have a lot of courage. They're fighting the seas all the time. You know, their living is very precarious, and their attitude becomes quite different from the attitude of people who work the land." Sue's own work exemplifies the labor patterns in camp, where everyone was expected to work and their only choices were extremely low-paid jobs. First, she volunteered to help two nuns who came to set up a school, then found she could get paid for making camouflage nets for the U.S. Army. Then, as older Nisei left the Manzanar Free Press on furlough, Sue became a cub reporter, learning the ropes of the newspaper field from senior staff. Working on the paper, she said, made her a little more aware of some of the thinking of the people. When asked about the Manzanar uprising of December 6, 1942, when 2 incarcerees were killed by the military and 9 others wounded, Sue recounted factors that led to this demonstration striking a chord in the camp at large. She said, people were they were still making adjustments from living by themselves in the city to being very crowded, living with strangers, having no privacy of any kind. And they had a lot of grievances about the food and about whether they were going to get paid. Some people hadn't even gotten paid, you know. Then there was the fact that the Issei weren't really recognized as adult leaders. I think there were so many grievances that they just sort of erupted at that time. And I guess, you know, the arrest of Harry Ueno was just the straw that really broke the camel's back. And I think everyone sympathized with this group, end quote. Art's interview questions were clearly informed by his meticulous research into and deep knowledge of community politics in Manzanar. And I think Sue's candor in discussing the Manzanar protest and the dynamics in camp shows her collegial relationship with Art and her trust in him as an interviewer. Many, many thanks, Art, for your inspiration, for your enormous contributions as a scholar, and for your friendship.
Thank you, Valerie. You know, just on that story about how my mother volunteered to be a teacher with the 2 nuns, when she got there were no books, there were no desks, there were no pencils, there was no paper. So she found firsthand experience with some of the way the WRA was intending, or at least initially treating, the incarcerees. Our next speaker is Diane Fujino, and Diane is a professor of Asian American Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Asian American Studies. She utilizes oral history interviews and archival documents in her research on Japanese American activism, including books on Yuri Kochiyama, Richie Aoki, Mitsuye Yamada, and Michael Yatsutake. She also did a quite detailed and excellent article on the Nisei progressives, which my brother was a member of. Diane?
So I'm going to use a mode of narrative that Art really models for us in his latest book, Nikkei Harvest, and that is personal storytelling to show public and historic significance. So when I think of Art Hansen, I think of many things: a brilliant, broad, curious mind, a beautiful, engaging writer, an ardent reader and scholar, and a generous and caring mentor and friend. Until I was asked to reflect on Art for this program, I hadn't realized how much his scholarship had impacted my own, especially in the areas of oral history and Japanese American activism. So I first came to know Art through his epic 5-volume, Japanese American World War II oral history project and various writings that emerged from it. I had students in my Japanese American history class at UCSB read those oral histories every year as a way to bring alive lived experiences and connect that to the broader history that we were learning. I was awed by Art's vast knowledge in the way he seemed to ask just the right questions. He was consistently attentive to both the person before him and to the history. And if you read Nikkei Harvest, you will see that kind of work that he does. My students loved reading about Amy Uno Ishii, Sue Kunitomi Embrey, Harry Ueno, Frank Emmy. I have to say, fewer chose James Omura because of the length of that oral history transcript. I confess I was most drawn to the stories of activists. And at a time when I was visiting people in prison and I was supporting political prisoners, I was eager to learn more about the draft resistors, who we know spent time in prison because of their principled resistance to the draft. It was an exciting period. The powerful documentaries Conscience and the Constitution and Rabbit in the Moon had just come out, and the JACL had just issued their apology, and there was a lot of energy around the draft resistors. I was fortunate to get to know Yosh Kuromiya and Frank Emmy, and they traveled each year to speak in my Japanese American history class. And we hosted at UCSB Momo Yashima's A Divided Community, featuring Frank and Yosh and Paul Tsuneshi in a live stage reading. I was at the time traveling to Harlem to do oral history interviews with Yuri Kochiyama and learning about the immense activism she was engaged in. Art was an anchor through all of this in ways I hadn't fully understood, offering sophisticated oral histories as a way to recover our activist past that had been erased from our history and unknown to many people like myself. Greg Robinson wrote in a recent piece in the Nichibei, "As a non-Asian entering Asian American studies, I certainly did look to Art as a model of how to create a place for myself within the field. And I think one of Art's superpowers and how he created a place for himself within the Japanese American community is by being constantly present, showing up to countless meetings for the draft resistors, to Manzanar pilgrimages, and serving as a senior historian at JANM for many years. He has been recognized for his important scholarship and activism, including a Sue Kunitomi Embrey Legacy Award from the Manzanar Committee. But I think more than the awards, he shows up constantly and talks with everybody, and there are no pretenses here. He was a favorite person of my mom, who was a volunteer here at the museum, and she always spoke of Art's friendliness and thoughtfulness, arriving with armloads of donuts, for example. I got to experience Art's generosity, mentorship, and wide networks, and he seems to know everyone. I wonder how many research projects and articles and books he's helped to cultivate. Having accompanied Yuri Kochiyama, right, a Nisei whose activism blossomed in the 1960s, I became curious about the progressive or radical Nisei activism occurring in the immediate post-war years. I had read Martha Nakagawa's well-researched Rafu Shimpo articles. I found Tim Carpenter's master's thesis, and it turns out Tim was Art's student. But I hit a roadblock looking for more archival research, and I contacted Art. And it turned out that Art had just recently seen Tim after many years' absence, and he located and sent to me a box of archives, which turned out to be Sukuni Tomi Embrey's. And we had many exchanges. That box turned out to be exactly what I needed to write about the Nisei progressives. And in these email exchanges between Art and myself, I wrote at one point, "You are taking this up as if it's your own project. What a generous intellectual and colleague you are." And indeed, my gratitude to you, Art. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Our next speaker is Christine Dennehy, and she's a professor of Japanese and Korean history at the California State University Fullerton, and has served as a historical consultant for the Go for Broke 2008 Oral History Project. She specializes in modern Japanese history with an emphasis on the Korean ethnic community. Christine?
Thank you. I feel like a bit of an imposter here, not coming really from the field of Japanese American history, but when I was hired in 2002 to teach Japanese history, it didn't take long before I met a student of Art's, and I got involved with Go for Broke, interviewing Nisei, who had served in the occupation in the MIS, and so that was my initial connection. And since then, I also teach a class on historical methodology, and the students, by far, every semester, the 1 or 2 weeks that we spend on oral history methodology is their favorite. And so I wanted to share with you a couple of the interviews that Art did that I think really make good teaching tools, because that's really our focus at Cal State Fullerton, is to work with the students. So many of the interviews were done by students and provided hands-on training like that. When I go over kind of the key points that I want the students to know about oral history, I say the key is really building a rapport and building trust. And if you listen to the audio interviews that Art has done, you can hear that right away. You can hear the way they laugh, the way they sometimes interrupt each other. They have a natural flow to the conversation that you don't get unless you have that interpersonal connection that was mentioned earlier, is very genuine and warm. So I want to give an example from an interview that Art did in 1974 in Southgate. On August 6th, he interviewed Seiko Ishida, who had been born in 1910 in Seattle, Washington, the daughter of a railroad worker and a picture bride mother. She would have been in her early 30s at Manzanar, Block 8, Barrack 2. And in this particular interview, Art is really looking for information, looking to kind of confirm some of the things that he's heard about the Manzanar, what he calls Manzanar Revolt. And it's an interesting exchange because one of the things we emphasize with students is asking open-ended questions and letting the narrator speak. But in this particular interview, you can Google it, it'll come right up on Calisphere with Seiko Ishida. If you forward to the 1 hour, 3 minute mark, Art gives an incredible 4-minute synopsis of the Manzanar Revolt, and that's all you'll ever need to know. The names, the details, the dates, perfect chronological order, and he finishes with that 4 minutes saying, "Now, I want to ask you if you, as one of the internees, happen to be aware of the resentment that was building up in the minds of the people in the camp towards these so-called Inu. Did you hear about this?" So that's not really an open-ended question. I mean, it kind of is, but it's very specific. And I think it speaks to the point that was made earlier that we emphasize with our students about doing your research before you go into the interview. Be able to ask informed, follow-up questions. And so Seiko didn't really answer the question. She talked about rumors, she talked about being busy with her own work, and then Art moved on to the next topic. I also used some of these oral history transcripts that Art did in my modern Japanese history class that I teach. And it's really interesting to me to see reference to Japanese terms, to things related to Japan that manifest themselves among members of the Japanese American community. So also in 1974, on July 24th, Art interviewed Ikuko Amatatsu Watanabe, who he refers to in other cases by the name Iku. Her picture in this oral history with her husband Hideo, the caption mentions her name as Dorothy. I'm going to refer to her as Iku. Art asks her a question about her background. She grew up on Bainbridge Island in Washington State. Her family were members of the Japanese Baptist Church. And so Art asks her about some of that background. Did you know Eto? Were you told to keep away from the so-called outcasts in Japan? She mentions that her family background as Christians made her not discriminate in the same way they might if they lived in Japan. There was reference, and Valerie and I did not coordinate this, but I wanted just to finish with a quote from Iku. She says, when she arrived at Manzanar, Block 3, she said, and we were kind of afraid, not knowing the California Japanese, from what we had heard about them previously, I guess. And Art interjects, kind of overlaps, what had you heard about them? Well, we had heard they were kind of scary people, rough and tough. And then she laughs, and that's not actually in the transcript, so that's another teaching moment, that if somebody laughs, it's good to put that, the methods of transcription are different. And then Iku finishes by saying, well, no, we found out later that they were no different, but that was what we had heard. So I'll leave you with that, and thank you, Art. You've left a real legacy for all of our students at Cal State Fullerton and beyond.
Thank you, Christine. Next, we have Dr. Enrico Naulati. He's a former student of arts and now a clinical psychologist in private practice who has over 30 years' experience providing psychotherapy to people of all ages. Art has said publicly that, quote, Rico is the closest thing he has to a son, unquote. Dr. Naulati is a former student of arts. Please, Enrico.
Well, I'm going to try my level best to say something coherent in honor of Art, but fear that my tears of profound gratitude will make that very challenging, but hang in there with me. So I first met Art in the spring of 1982 when I sauntered into his American cultural history class. At that time, I was a shadow of a person. My life had caved in, psychologically speaking. All the repression required to exist as a Catholic seminarian, studying for the priesthood in rural Scotland as a teenager, came back to haunt me. I was a provincial working class immigrant navigating cosmopolitan Southern California out of his league. As a soccer standout at Cal State Fullerton on the team, I was eventually to turn pro, but after a run-in with the coach, abandoned that childhood dream entirely. My fiancée left me. It happens to be my darling wife, Janet, here. Art was a bit of a matchmaker getting us back together again. We've been married for 30 years. I was without an existential compass, living alone, reading voraciously to understand the misery that I was in. It was in that state of mind that I took Art's class. He assigned a book at the time called Everything in Its Path by Kai Erikson, who's the son of Erik Erikson, the famous American developmental psychologist. I found it riveting. The book was a psychocultural analysis of the aftermath of the Buffalo Creek disaster in West Virginia in 1972, a massive flood that destroyed the local community. Themes of uprootedness, anomie, alienation, displacement numbness pervaded the book, which all spoke to me in very personal ways. Taking a page from Art's very definition of historical writing, bring yourself to the enterprise without making yourself the enterprise. Bring yourself to the enterprise without making yourself the enterprise, which actually happens to be my current definition of the best that psychotherapy has to offer. I wrote an essay for him, and here is how he responded over 40 years ago. And I know that for a fact because here's the essay right here. Wow. And here's Art's comments. You may think, he didn't red ink, he blue inked it. You may think with all those comments that I didn't get a particularly good grade, but I got an A on it. Yay! But anyway, here's what Art wrote. Your paper is reflective of an examined and deeply experienced life. What you say emerges not merely as the product of an intellectual exercise, but rather the byproduct of your keen sensibility. Consequently, when reading this essay, one is driven to go beyond simple comprehension of the modern calamities and actually apprehend its dislocative anomic effects. I feel you do a marvelous job of revealing the macrocosmic significance of Erickson's Buffalo Creek microcosm. Part of the reason for this inheres within my opening comments, but another explanation is your splendid sense of language. I admire your fresh phraseology and your capacity for forcing the reader into simultaneously confronting himself, his, her world, and the relationship between the two of these. Reading Art's affirmatively incisive reaction to my paper was like CPR for my soul. Adrift and void of direction in life, Art's engagement helped coalesce in me an emerging sense that I had intellectual capacities and a way with words. Shortly thereafter, as I remember it, I visited him during an office hour, and he literally said to me, "Who are you?" Let me pause and slow down and quote the French philosopher and political activist Simone Weil here. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. A certain kind of attention given generously at a certain kind of time can have a certain kind of effect on a certain kind of person. Little did Art know that asking me that question and listening to the torrential answer on my end, he was for all intents and purposes my first therapist. Or in retrospect, maybe he was taking my oral history. Actually, I think at the end of the day, there's a thin line between being a good therapist and a keenly attentive oral historian. So from there, I joined Art and a merry band of students after every class in the pub at Cal State Fullerton, getting intoxicated in all the meanings of the word. He hired me as a research assistant. My job? Well, he took me to the bookstore, selected and paid out of his own pocket key texts he thought I should read, and announced to me that reading them was my job. He became the father I never had. An accessible authority figure, a confidant, a jokester, a prototype of an intellectual that was non-existent in my life, that was now my North Star. His believing in me helped me believe in me. When it was time to consider graduate school, like a good mentor, he let me steer the ship. I ended up going to Seattle University to get a master's degree in existential phenomenological psychology, and from there went on to Columbia University and got my PhD in clinical psychology. Even though I've been in private practice for over 30 years, I have a side gig as an author and a mental health advocate that is my true passion. I've authored 5 books, a host of journal and magazine articles, and appeared on many TV and radio outlets that has established me as a nationally recognized reformer of mental health policy and practice in the U.S. Last week, my latest book was just released. It's called Flourishing Love, A Secular Guide to Lasting Intimate Relationships. Not only am I forever indebted to art for being the first person in my life to plant the idea that I might possess potential as a writer and find virtuous identity, not shameful arrogance or timidity, being of working class origins, calling himself an intellectual, but the gift he gave me in his American cultural history class over 40 years ago keeps on giving. In all my writings, I feel compelled for all the right reasons to address the cultural and historical forces at play when investigating what humans are inclined to perceive as atypical behavior in need of medicalized or moral religious solutions. You are embedded in my intellectual consciousness and conscience, Art, and all that I have written and will write reflects the imprint of your influence on a young man many, many years ago who had no influence and is now fortified to assert an influence he is confident he possesses because of your influence. Thank you, Art.
Wow, Enrico. We're going to follow something from Art. So I feel very, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Sharon Yamato, and I'm proud to call Art Hansen my friend, and I'm going to break up too. So we all know in his work and among friends, Art is a great listener, right? But those of us who know him also know he's a great talker. So we really put together very quickly as excerpts from the interview that was done of Art by Jim Gatewood for Densho in 2010 and by Frank Abed in 1998. Short clips. And I just want to point out that Art was a bit rounder back then. So I do want to give a special thanks. We did this very quickly, and it's not too long, but Evan Kodani here at JANM is a master at putting things together very quickly. So we hope you enjoy this little short video.
Have you kept count over the years how many interviews you've done?
No, I haven't, but I would guess it's probably, I guess it's in the several hundred maybe. It wasn't like I just went, became a sort of like Wilt Chamberlain with having intercourse with women or something like this. I mean, this was, and I've slowed down a lot as far as the number of interviews I can do because I don't think I'm quite as effective anymore. The reason I'm not quite as effective is severalfold. One, I can't take as much time as I used to be able to do it because I've become very mindful of how much time I have left. James Sakota, is so fussy about things and everything that when I was interviewing him, he's not a person I would have necessarily chosen for a friend. It was a wonderful source. When he was in camp, he kept 4 different diaries. He even kept one which he called his sex diary. I never saw it. That was his private diary. And his sex diary might have been, for instance, kissing somebody. I don't know. Togo Tanaka, I felt, and Bob Spencer, I felt maybe it's just because they were more like academics that I had liked. I mean, there are a lot of academics I can't stand, but these were academics that they reminded me of academics I really liked. Fred Tayama, but here he was, a super patriot, and that's the thing that got him in so much trouble. Even the cafes he ran, the U.S. cafes, and then when he's he's on the anti-Axis committee, and he's this what I referred to in my article in the matter as muscular Americanism, where it's like these Tea Party types now and everything, and of course he goes to camp and he's braying this sort of stuff and everything, and the only person in camp that was more obnoxious in that regard was Toki Slocum. As far as the personal relationships with people, I had such a close relationship with Harry Ueno, and I watched the whole arc of his life to the point where he's losing his car and you know, practically losing his mind and everything else, but seeing him when he was razor sharp, could remember everything. But when I'd come up to, even when he was in a bad state, he would make 2 meals for me. This is the original guy was a cook in Block 22. You know, here's a guy who would make 2 meals for me, one in Japanese meal, and then he would make a so-called American meal, you know, for me, so that, and then, you know, I said, geez, I'm fat enough. I mean, I don't need 2 meals.
I met Jimmy when we were going out from the hotels in Salt Lake City out to the campus of the University of Utah, and he was sitting on a minibus with me, and I was just making chit-chat with somebody on the bus, and he turned around and he had a name identification, and it said, you know, James O'Mora, and I couldn't believe it because I didn't know he was still alive. So I interviewed him for about 4 days, and that's where I got my first reading of him, and by the time I picked him up at a motel in Hollywood, till the time that I, you know, took him back 4 days later, it was almost nonstop. I mean, he had already done the same sort of thing with Frank, and we just talked for 4 days. And he, you know, in the mornings when I would get up, he would be sitting on the couch down in our living room, and he was ready to start at like 7 o'clock. He was ready to start being interviewed. And one time even the tape recorder broke, and he continued to talk right through the time that I was trying to fix the tape recorder. So, I mean, he had a real need to be able to tell his story.
I think I mentioned the first time I met Jim, the first question he asked me, he said, all right, I want to talk to you a little bit. How does a white guy, for instance, get along in Japanese American history? You know, and it was hard to get jobs in ethnic studies if you didn't have the face of that group, et cetera, or damn near closely related face. You know, I mean, David Yu could do Japanese American things, even though he's Korean American, although there was some hesitation too. But the thing is, you know, that does sort of have a guiding sort of way. So I think that it pushed me more into the oral history than I might otherwise have been predisposed to go in. But see, I was a historian first before I was an oral historian. So when people call me an oral historian, I'm a little bit sort of insulted, because no, it is as though, for instance, the method is greater than the madness, you know, where it's really the madness, for instance, that is the historian trying to find out sort of truth. And then in order to get truth claims, how do you go about getting it? One way you do it is through doing oral history. But I want to be thought of, you know, as a person who is a historian.
That was so great. And we will have an opportunity for Art to say something in response to everything that was said today, including maybe something he said. You could tell, so my hoppy coat here, this is Terminal Island, and I'm not a Terminal Islander, so I can relate, Art, to what you're saying in terms of an outsider's perspective. And sometimes outsiders can get a lot of history out of people, more so than the insiders. And I co-wrote a book called Terminal Island, The Lost Communities of Los Angeles Harbor. And that particular book was reviewed by Art in the Nichibei. And this image that you've been seeing, the woodblock image, which was done by Patricia Wakita, the artist. And yes, and Patricia, and that's going to be on the cover. And we're going to hear more about the book, but I just want to say Patricia's in-laws are here today. So thank you very much for coming. Some from Riverside. But Kenji Taguma, that many of you know, he's the president, CEO, publisher, everything about the Nichibei in San Francisco. He's going to talk a little bit about Art and the upcoming book.
Hi everybody, I'm Kenji Taguma with the Nichibei Foundation and editor-in-chief of what is now the Nichibei News. Just changed it recently. Bringing you some Northern California love for the Wilt Chamberlain of oral history. That's the tagline now. I'm proud to be here on behalf of the Nichibei Foundation to introduce the upcoming publication of A Nikkei Harvest, reviewing the Japanese American historical experience and its legacy, as you can see up there. I'm especially proud, personally, because this volume is dedicated to and celebrates the contributions of two of my greatest advisors and mentors, Wayne Maeda and Art Hansen. I remember when Art and Harry Ueno, Chizu, and Emiko Mori came to our Nichibei Times office back in the late 90s. I was still in my 20s. I'm still in my 20s. Don't have an age. Of course, Chizu and Emiko went on to create the national award, Emmy-winning Rabbit in the Moon. And Art has contributed so much. He's come up for Films of Remembrance a couple times. We've done some book events together. One time, I don't know what possessed us, but we visited two of the most historic places in the Japanese American experience, the Koma Japanese Cemetery, which has a lot of memorials to the Issei pioneers. And then we went all the way to the OK grave, and because there was so much traffic and it got dark, I got lost. We missed our appointment there. And fortunately, there was someone leaving the Gold Trail School, had a key to the side gate, and I begged him. I have this scholar from Los Angeles, came all the way. We traveled here for like 4 or 5 hours. We need to go see the grave, and guided by the moonlight, we went to go pay our respects to OK. That's quite an adventure. I can't say enough how much Art's contributions are appreciated, both to the Nichibei and to me personally. He's also helped to validate my father's experience as a wartime Nisei draft resistor, as, of course, the leading scholar of the Japanese American resistance. He arranged for my father and other resistors to visit his wife Debbie's class at San Jose State University. When the historic Nichibei Times was closing in the summer of 2009, we had to work quickly to establish the Nichibei Foundation separately with no seed money from the Nichibei Times, and do whatever we can to muster the organization within a short time frame. Art was one of the first people I asked to be on our advisory council, as we wanted to establish credibility as an educational foundation and create an advisory council of community leaders. So today is a major milestone for the Nichibei Foundation as we present our first book coming into our 15th year and the 125th anniversary of the historic Nichibei legacy, starting with the Nichibei Shimbun. The book was partially funded by indirectly Shohei Ohtani, because we had a Nichibei Day with the A's game and sold 950 tickets, and our board decided to back the project 100%. So thank you, Shohei, and welcome to the Yankees next year. Just lost some points. Well, we're proud to announce the upcoming publication of Nikkei Harvest, a collection of nearly 70 book reviews, I think, in the Nichibei Weekly, and the subsequently named from this year Nichibei News by Art Hansen, and a selection of reviews by Wayne Maeda. I think from 1995 to his death in 2013, Wayne also did about 70 book reviews, to my estimation, so you're going to surpass him. We started running book reviews in the Nichibei Times after I took over as editor in 95. Starting modestly, today we publish more than 15 book reviews in our summer book review and in our winter book review in our New Year's edition. We do so because we wanted to empower authors, provide a selection of books for children's books for parents or grandparents, cookbooks for foodies, and more media literature and historical work. We feel it's important to empower authors who tell our stories and provide criticism when it was warranted. Some authors have said that we published the only review that was written on the books. Art had completed the manuscript a couple of years ago. I forgot exactly when. Then earlier this year, a group of his friends with Sharon and Chris Nakagawa and so on approached me about the publication of this book as Art expressed his desire to get it published. Thanks to Patricia Wakita for this wonderful design of the book cover, and our former associate editor, Alec Yoshio McDonald, for copy editing the project. It's in the process right now. We're laying it out and going through the last final round of copy editing. But mostly we are indebted to Naomi Hirahara for helping to shepherd this project, because I didn't have the time or expertise, and she lent in her expertise and connections because she's just a dynamo, right? As we navigate this first project. We do have a video interview of Naomi and Art that we showed at one of our events. It's on our YouTube channel, just put up an hour ago. If you go to the Nichibei Foundation YouTube, and Naomi interviews Art about the contents of the book. Lastly, I'd like to just share the summary of the book. And there are one-sheets out there so you can get more information on how to order it, and all these wonderful wonderful praise for the book, including by Diane Fujino and Sharon Yamato. Nikkei Harvest, Reviewing the Japanese American Historical Experience and Legacy, and Its Legacy, is authored by Arthur A. Hansen, a preeminent scholar of the Japanese American experience, and late scholar Wei Maeda. More than a collection of their book reviews in the Nichibei Weekly and Nichibei News over a 14-year span, it intertwines together what University of Pennsylvania history professor Eiichiro Azuma calls a must-read for both academics and laypersons. Through his careful and conscientious reviews of scholarly and literary works, Azuma says Hansen, quote, tells us a lot about the state of the field of Japanese American studies and key aspects of Nikkei experience. But he also successfully weaves new research findings into narratives of his own to enhance a public understanding of their complex and fascinating history, end quote. Hansen's work is grouped with 9 thematic chapters encompassing the Japanese American past and present. All of these chapters are prefaced by extensive headnotes that provides a means of contextualizing the respective subject area, says Hansen. The reviews themselves, taken collectively, are designed to simultaneously illuminate and interrogate the Japanese American historical experience and legacy. We have some book plates signed by Art for those who want them. And we'll have information on the book in a sign-up sheet for those who want more information on it. In the, I guess, reception area. Please see Naomi and I. Anyways, thank you for this opportunity to present the Nikkei Harvest and honor the contributions of our dear friend, Art Hansen.
We're getting towards the end, but we're kind of like family here, so we wanted to highlight some people who came quite a distance to be here with Art. One is someone, Mary Doy. Can you wave your hand? She came from Chicago, the Windy City. She worked with Art on the regeneration interviews for the Japanese Americans who were released from camp and then went to Chicago. And they're wonderful interviews. I don't think Clark and Division really could have the layers that it did without your interviews that you supervised and did. So thank you very much, Mary, for coming here. We have someone, believe it or not, who came from Yokohama, Japan. Takamichi Takago, can you please wave your hand? And he studied with Art and is continuing to do Japanese American studies work. So, he did other things. He's doing other things here. but I think maybe the main thing was for you to see Art, right? Okay, and Gwen Jensen, will you wave your hand? And her husband, Jeff, and came from Denver. We have to mention Jeff because he drove them out here. And they drove through snow in Denver and to this beautiful weather. And actually, Gwen and I, see, what Art does is he lassos people. He's like a cowboy into different projects. So he caught Gwen and myself to do this book for the Japanese American Medical Association called Silent Scars of Healing Hands. And Gwen did these gorgeous, beautiful oral histories of all these doctors that are now all deceased. And it's a wonderful collection, and it's probably going to get reprinted, so keep your eyes open. And Gwen is working on a rewrite of her dissertation, so we're hoping to see that on the shelves as well. Is Gil Kuromia here? Okay, yes, and Gil Kuromia is here from Washington, so thank you so much for being here. And it's not out of state, but we got to mention all the Manzanar people. Elisa Lynch is here. Where are you, Elisa? Elisa, yes, so instrumental in her work with the National Park Service is all very well known to all of us in the community, and it's so great to have you here and see you here. Anyone else? Just wave your. You want to wave your hand? Oh, Richard's here. Okay, we got a lot of Manzanar folks. See, you should have been wearing some hoppy coats so we could know who you are. So wonderful folks from Manzanar. Yeah, and we'll find out. There's going to be a reception so we could talk story. But yeah, thank you so much for coming here to celebrate art.
So I have the honor of introducing our next video. It was put together by someone, I mean, this is a friend, right? Curtis Nakagawa. Don't listen, he doesn't want any attention, so please don't go up to him and say that was a beautiful video. Anyway, Curtis I would say he'd do anything for art. He's that good a friend. And he actually commissioned a world-renowned koto player to write this song especially for this occasion, and she also arranged it. He had to have it recorded. He did all the visuals for it. I mean, it's a special tribute to art by someone that I would call one of his greatest friends, right? So it's really beautiful. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi everyone, my name is Yukiko Matsuyama. Sorry I could not be there in person. I would like to play a special song I composed for today's event. It's titled Thank You at Hansen. And my brother Hirotaka Ogawa worked with me to arrange this song too. I hope you enjoy it. This song really comes from the heart. Thank you for coming, and congratulations to Art Hansen.
Thank you, Project. That was amazing, Curtis. Thank you, Project. And now we get to hear, thank you, Jody. I'm kind of in between, so it doesn't really bother me that much. But now we get to hear from the Will Chamberlain of oral history. That's Kenji's fault, that's not me. So you'll be forever known as the Will Chamberlain of oral history, a historian, an actual historian who loves to talk, and an academic that we don't just like, but we love, Dr. Art Hansen.
I can't thank everybody enough for being here today and for the incredible things that you've said, of which I was the beneficiary. It's one of those kinds of things. I think most people knew that a little while ago my designation was to die of cancer, and I've managed to actually live through that. I think I'm going to live a little bit longer. So the kind of things that you were saying is the kind that you could say to a person when they're passed and everything. And here I was actually present, and it's just so incredible. The honor is not for me. The honor really is for the Japanese American community. Two things that I've really loved a lot in my life they're still both very much in my life, are sports. I watch so darn many sports, it's unbelievable. But I just love sports, and I loved them when I was growing up, and the only thing that's ever matched it is my love for the Japanese American community and the Japanese American past and everything, and to be involved with so many things that have been going on that relate to the Japanese American historical experience. And the things that people said here up at this lectern and everything, each one just Rico was up here, my closest thing to a son that I ever had, and Rico was not only on the verge of crying, but it spilled over a little bit, and I feel that way myself, that I just feel like it's such a great honor and everything, and there's so many other people out there, and the thing that I was trying to do more than anything else with the interviews was actually to hear the Japanese American people speak back to the experiences that they've had, and not to be silent Americans, but to actually verbalize themselves. I never had a single problem with doing oral history with people. People told me that they're not going to speak to you, especially because you're a Hakujin, you're a white person, and everything, but it wasn't a problem at all. I think if you do an interview, you have to do certain things to do it reasonably well, and one of them is that you have to know a lot about the subject that you're asking somebody to tell you more about, that they can't respect you if you really aren't grounded in your information. So for one thing, I tried to make that the case, to research, and it wasn't a hardship for me. I ate it up when we were doing the Manzanar, David Hacker, one of my students, and I did the Manzanar riot article. It was the first article I'd ever written of any sort. It was the first one, and it sort of become something of a classic. It was the first thing I ever did. But to do it, Dave Hacker and I used to drive in almost every day during the summer, and we'd go to UCLA to the archives, and all we talked about on the way there was not Will Chamberlain and how many women he had sex with, but instead we talked about all of the documentation that we were reading, and how we were fortunate to be able to have that documentation available to us. And we talked about it on the way there, and then while we were there, we just worked all day, and then we got things Xeroxed for us, documents and everything, and we took those home, and on the way home, we talked again about this stuff. And so, it was really on top of things. In fact, I was first going to give a paper on on the Manzanar riot article, and I was going to give it down in Albuquerque, and I was finishing up the paper at my home in Irvine when I was married with my first wife, and just as we were coming to the end of it, the phone rang, and some woman said to me, "What is your wife doing having sex with my husband?" Well, you know, I had to deal with that at that particular time, but my wife was doing the copy editing of the thing that I was presenting in Albuquerque. So we just continued. I continued, finishing the pages that I was doing. She continued doing it, and I went downstairs and I said, "I have to make a confession. I've been having an affair myself." So the thing is, and now, you know, my first wife is 83 years old, and I'm 85, and my second wife is 15 years my junior, but my second wife is such a wonderful person, probably one of the best people that you'll ever want to meet in your life. And she just said to me, she said, when my first wife's husband died, her second husband died, she said, "You know, Bobby really needs you too. You need to be in her life. Go and see her." And so I did, and I've been continuing to see her, and it's been a really nice thing. We just go and have lunch. Whenever I'm up in San Luis Obispo County, she lives in Arroyo Grande, and I just drive over and then pick her up, and we go to an interesting restaurant called Roosters, because they have roosters actually walking around you while you're eating. You gotta watch it. You know, you pecker. So, but in any event, you know, it's been a great ride. I loved working here at JANM. I actually, you know, the 5 years I worked here as a senior historian, that stopped when JANM was running out of money. We had an incredible curatorial staff. I mean, when the staff, Karen Higa was the head of the staff, the curatorial staff, and she could be pretty tough at times and everything, but we had meetings every week, and they were so thorough, and the people that came, Valerie Matsumoto sent a lot of the people that worked at JANM, and these were all really bright people and so dedicated to what we were doing. We had such great discussions about it. They were far better meetings than I ever had at Cal State Fullerton in the history department. I mean, they were incredible meetings, and I loved. After that, I worked with John Asaki in the video unit, and doing the interviews with them and actually working with them was a wonderful experience. I worked on a project called Big Drum that Sojin Kim headed up, and I wish Sojin was here today. She lives in Washington, D.C. and works for the Smithsonian Institution, but it was an amazing experience going around the country and everything, including to Chicago, to do interviews about people that were involved in Tycho. So, you know, that was a wonderful sort of experience. But one of the things I liked best of all in 2004, we had a national conference that was sponsored by the Japanese American National Museum, and it was held in Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas. And at that particular time, they were just getting ready to open up the Clinton Library, and Bill Clinton was supposed to be the speaker, the featured speaker, but he had a health problem at that time, was hospitalized. And George Takei happened to be there, and George Takei, without a note and anything, and hardly any time to be able to prepare, stood up in front of this whole crowd and gave the most remarkable speech. It was, and you know, Bill Clinton was a hell of a speaker. I mean, you know, and then to have George come in there, you know, we didn't lose much of a step, and it was really, really good. And then we had a great conference, national conference in 2008 in Denver, and that was a wonderful, wonderful sort of experience. And some of the people that are here today were at Gwen Jensen, who was referenced. Gwen was at that conference and in Denver, because her family lives in Colorado, but that was nice. And then in 2013, we had another national conference in Seattle. And these were so fantastically intellectually challenging. And my job, I worked with 3 other people. Nancy Araki, who was the first employee at JANM. And then I worked with Alice Nakamoto And then I worked with one of my closest friends who's been deceased for a few years, was Lloyd Inouye, who was the most wonderful person you want to meet, just a wonderful person. And putting together the conferences, and my job was mostly putting together the sessions that were at those conferences. I didn't have anything to do with the planning of the facilities or anything like that. That was taken care of by other people. But putting together those sessions were so energizing. I loved them. And then JANM hired me on a lot of different grants. Thanks to Nancy and Alison Nakamoto to get me onto those grants. So I've had a long sort of experience here, and it's been a great place. I saw the reduction in the program in some ways occurring in two ways. One, they were running out of money, and so they couldn't keep the staff that they had for a while, and that was a problem. Then another thing was that one of the directors that they had was a man who called off all conferences. He said they don't draw enough people and they don't make enough money. So he had this Hello Kitty thing here, and it brought thousands of people there. I kind of hated that because, I mean, it seems so anti-intellectual. You know, here we're trying to raise the intellectual level of things. But it was certainly elevated today by the presence of all you people. You know, I'm a people person, and you know, I with my cane and stuff like now. I mean, it's 2017. I you know, had a heart attack and a quadruple bypass surgery, and then I've had this bout with cancer and stuff like that. And so I'm a little bit more consigned to the home place and everything, so I don't get out very much anymore and stuff. But getting out today and getting out for a day that was dedicated to me and my career and stuff, you know, it goes beyond my wildest imaginations. I was telling somebody at lunch today, when I was in the 9th grade, we had a class at junior high school called orientation. And in that orientation class, we were asked at the end of the class that, you know, after taking all these Cooter preference tests and all these other things to find out what we were interested in, say, what do you want to do with your life? You know, give your 1, 2, and 3 thing. Well, I knew what I always wanted to do was to be a teacher. So everyone was a teacher. And it was a history teacher, an English teacher, and then this drew laughter from the group today. I said I wanted to be a typing teacher. And why did I want to be a typing teacher? Because, you know, the person that taught the class taught it like an athletic event and stuff like this. And, you know, and then if you would type, I was able to type 100 words a minute. And they would put your name up outside the room, and people would walk by and see that as this incredible typist. And you know, and I said, so I had such high expectations. I mean, and so to only have this 50-year career with Japanese American history, no, I'm frustrated because I never got to be a typing teacher. But thank you very much for indulging, you know, a loser who didn't get what he wanted. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.